thank you all for coming this morning. It's going to be a beautiful day out here. My name is Sandra Wick. I am the crop production agent with the Post Rock Extension District. If you don't know what counties Post Rock covers, we are the largest district in the state, good or bad. But we cover not only Smith County, but we also cover Osborne, Jewell, Lincoln, and Mitchell counties. And I am, like I said, the crop production. We have several other agents as well in our district. So I know if it would have rained yesterday, we would have had a lot more people here today. But I know people are hot and heavy out and planting corn right now because most of them have their beans done. And so they wanted to get the corn in before we hopefully get some more rain. But we were fortunate to have some pretty timely rains, as you can see on this plot. I'll introduce you to our cooperator, but I wanted to introduce you to some of the other special people here today. Romulo Lollato, where is Romulo?
I'm right here.
Right here, I should see him. He's the tallest person probably here. He is our wheat and small grain specialist from K-State. So we want to welcome him out. This is probably in the middle of your plot tours for the state, right?
That is right. Yeah, we have our latest one, the last one is scheduled for that week of June 12th. So,
okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. We also have with us, and they're kind of a team approach here. If you see Romulo, you'll probably see Miss Kelsey. And it's Miss Kelsey Onofre Andersen, or Andersen Onofre, I'm sorry. She is our plant pathology person, so she is our plant doctor. She has been really, really busy this year, and I don't want to steal her thunder, but she's going to tell you about what's going on in the state as far as wheat diseases. And so she'll have a lot to talk about in that regard. We also have several of our sponsors here. So I wanted to recognize them as well. It should be on your front cover here on all the sponsors. If you're here, we want to recognize you. So please either hold your hand up or whatever. Agmark LLC, Kansas Wheat Alliance, I sell Bryson, Havercamp, Randall Farmers Co-op Union, Central Valley Ag, CPI. I know we have lots of CPI here, and thank them for bringing all their student interns too. They usually come down here as well. Midway Co-op. I know Jeff is here and Stan is here. Sims Fertilizer and Chemical, Trinity Ag Cooperative Inc. I especially want to, I know there's several here from Trinity. They're who's sponsoring our lunch today after the tour, right there at Trinity. So we want to thank them. Lang Diesel, Phillips Seed Farms, I did see him here, and Star Seed, and I saw Star Seed here too, right there. Big John, right? Okay. So please thank these people for the sponsors because we couldn't put this on without the sponsors as well. The next most important person here today is our cooperator, Mark Kuhlmann. So Mark, if you'll come up here and be front and center. He should be no stranger to you guys. He has been very gracious to be a plot cooperator. As you can see, and I think Romulo quoted this, this is one of the best plots he's seen so far in the wheat conditions so far. So we want to thank Mark for that and for all of his work that he's done. Also, I want to thank the people who rode the back of the drill when we drilled this. Not only myself, but Cindy Tuxhorn and Emma Meyer, our new Family Consumer Sciences agent, and one of them's her sister-in-law right here. I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. What? Leah. Leah, yeah. So Leah Meyer too. So Mark, I'm going to go on and turn it over. You can kind of explain what we did to the farm here. And if you guys had any questions before we start going down the varieties, then ask Mark.
Okay. We planted the wheat plot. What day was that?
Right here.
Okay. October the 9th at 93 pounds an acre.
Yeah, just hold it up to your mouth.
Okay.
There you go.
The previous crop was summer fallow, but for that I had soybeans, and then summer followed it. And so the fertilizer, I've done a soil sample, and it only required 34 pounds of actual in, and then I put on 40 rock, so that was it 15 pounds phosphate, 2.4 pounds of sulfur, and 0.4 pounds of zinc. And in March I had it sprayed with 3 ounces of Rave for weeds stuff. So
Okay.
I think that's about all.
These two. So if you want to come on up here, Romulo.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, folks, and thanks, Sandra, for organizing, and Mark for hosting the plot here. I guess before we jump in the variety, just an overview of what has the wheat crop been through this season. How are things looking out around the state, right? So Kelsey and I, we kind of covered the entire state, so we've been out and about quite a bit here in the last few weeks. So starting back off in the fall, right, and how rainfall worked out. If you guys would remember there in early September, there was some rainfall that came by, especially in the western part of the state. Some folks went out and started planting fairly early. And with that early planted crop, we were even a little bit concerned that it was pretty big at one point in the season there. Maybe using too much water and risking running into drought stress later on, right? Then the rest of the month of September was actually fairly dry, and the month of October was fairly dry as well. It wasn't until the last week of October, first week of November, that then we got some really good rainfalls across the entire state. So what happened there? Planting happened on time because we were able to harvest the summer crops on time as well. But sometimes we had some late emergence because it didn't come, if we were planting on dry soils, right? Perhaps it didn't come up until we got some of that rain in November. And other times we had some uneven emergence that, there was some partial moisture and the fields came up a little bit there when they were planted, and some of the seed was just laying there until that rainfall came about. So if we move especially west from here, the very far northwest corner of the state, Atwood, and perhaps a little bit east from there, there's a lot of uneven crop out there. I was there about 10 days ago. It looks like you were walking into a field and part of the field was heading out already. Part of the field was still the boot stage, so really different phenology there. And that has many consequences, but one of them is just difficulty on herbicide decisions, right? If you have different crop stages in the same field, making those decisions is more complicated. Some uneven emergence also happened in kind of the south central part of the state. Now then for a different reason, right? Because whenever that rainfall came, late October, early November, some parts of the state got up to 7 or 8 inches of rain. So that was almost too much water, right? And then we're seeing some water logging happen in parts of the field and some uneven stands going into that are lasting through date. So November had good amount of rainfall. We had above average temperatures as well that allowed the crop to grow out and tiller out in the fall. That's kind of what we want, some of those fall tillers. So we went into the winter with a really good crop condition this year overall. Compared to past years, when perhaps a fifth of the state had an emergence in the fall, especially southwest Kansas, right? As statewide, we're going into the winter on really good conditions this year comparative to the last few years here. Now, winter brought about a couple of large snowfall events that helped the crop as well. But other than that, it was a pretty dry winter. And we're coming out of the winter, early spring, and it was also dry. So actually, by mid-April or so, there was a lot of the crops out there starting to show some drought, some impacts of the drought already. Some of those lower leaves were really flaring up. We also had the abortion of some tillers, and so that mid-April was very crucial. And at that point in time, for a bulk of the state, we started getting some rainfalls again. Parts of western Kansas got 3-4 inches, and so just overall, for the majority of the state, we got some good rainfalls between that mid-April until date, Easter, and around that time frame, right? So that really put the crop in a good condition. So I think, again, statewide, the potential is pretty decent. There are parts of the state when it's where we have had issues that they missed these rainfalls in the last month. For example, a big chunk actually probably moving from Jewell County west, right? A big chunk of that north, central, northwest part of the state is under very severe drought. A lot of the wheat crop, especially planted after soybeans, right? That is already a drier cropping system than if you're in a good situation like this after fallow, is showing very, very severe drought stress. Very far southwest as well, kind of the southernmost tiers of counties going to to the Colorado border, showing quite a bit of drought stress as well, comparative to other parts of the state. But other than those 2 pockets, the majority of the state is looking actually in pretty good conditions. Now, kind of a shame too, because Southwest Kansas haven't had these good conditions probably in 3 or 4 years, and things were looking really good. And then wheat streak mosaic happened, right? And so at this point, I'll probably turn over to Kelsey, and she can give an update on what's going on in wheat streak mosaic around the state and other diseases.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Romulo. So wheat streak mosaic virus, has anybody heard of it? We're seeing some this year. So it's been a very hot topic here in Kansas because unfortunately we're having one of the worst years in terms of the number of fields where we're finding symptoms and in terms of the size of the hot spots where it's really bad, right? So it's one of the worst years that we've had. What's interesting about this year is we have outbreaks in many parts of the state, right? So in western Kansas where it's been more typical, and then really throughout the central corridor we're seeing some really bad examples of wheat streak mosaic virus. So we're taking the opportunity here at these plot tours to go over some of the basics, right? Because the most important decisions that we can make for wheat streak mosaic virus management actually happen after harvest, right? So Sandra is awesome, and she put a nice handout. This is K-State's official extension pub on wheat streak mosaic virus, right? So a lot of the things that I'll mention here are all covered in this handout. This is pretty nice because it shows you the symptoms. We can also look at them when we get out into the plots. There is a little bit of wheat streak out here in the field. And it also has a nice table that shows other hosts for the mites and also the virus, right? So we get those questions a lot. I'll go over just some basics here. So if you look at figure 3, you can actually see those tiny curl mites. So as a reminder, right, these curl mites are what move the virus around. When they feed on the plant, the virus goes into the wheat plant. Now the problem is they're extremely small, right? So you're looking at that, it almost looks like a grain of rice, but you actually can't see it without a microscope, right? That's what makes wheat streak a bit challenging, because we probably have millions of mites out in this field right now, right? In any given wheat field, we have millions of mites, but we can't see them, right? So if we had millions of mosquitoes here, that would be really concerning, right? But these mites we're not seeing, and so that raises some challenges. The mites really like warm weather, so they do their best. They can reproduce and last about 10 days, right? Their whole life cycle lasts about 10 days, but they can double their populations really quickly when weather's warm. So at harvest, our mite populations are the highest they'll ever be in the state, right? Weather's really warm, and what happens is they can tell the plant's drying down, right? So they get some sense that the plant's dying. They don't fly, right? If you look at them, they're really simple. They just look like little cigars with a couple legs. And they walk themselves up to the top of the plant and they try to catch a wind, right? And so most of them will land pretty close to the field, but if we get the winds like we can get in Kansas, right, they can go up to 10 miles. And so the worst fields you'll see, so when they're moving, right, they'll move into whatever grassy host, whatever is around, and if it's a good host, right, they can stay there and replicate. The worst fields we see are examples where we have volunteer wheat and wheat established right next to it, right, because most of those mites are moving. They need this green bridge. So what I'm talking about here is the green bridge. They need a way to get from our harvested crop to our fall planted crop. They need a bridge to get them there. The best bridge is, like I mentioned, volunteer wheat, right? So we see the worst cases when we have a hail come pre-harvest, right? Because hail pre-harvest, grain falls to the ground, we get volunteer, all the mites have to do is fall straight down, right? And so Nebraska's done some work where they've actually shown on satellite images these big swaths of wheat streak that come after pre-harvest hail, right? You can kind of see the damage from that hail event. But often we have volunteer in other places, right? Maybe we got a late flush of volunteer. Maybe we have volunteer that we couldn't control in our milo or our soybeans that were double cropped, right? So the mites can survive there. And to a lesser extent, they can survive on a lot of other grasses and hosts, right? And you can see that table on the handout that Sandra provided here. So again, once they're into the fall crop, then they've infected the crop for the season, and we can see symptoms usually later in the spring when it warms up. So as Romulo mentioned, we really started to see symptoms show up in April here in Kansas. Another really important thing about wheat streak mosaic, and this is really relevant to the conversation we'll have about varieties, is it's actually a complex of viruses. So it's not just one virus, right? Often we call it wheat streak mosaic virus, and that's just one of the viruses that these mites can move around. We have a couple others that are pretty important here in Kansas. One's called triticum mosaic virus, and the other is High Plains wheat mosaic virus, right? They're all moved by that curl mite, and they all show symptoms that are really similar to the picture you can see on the first page of the handout, right? So it's hard to tell them apart unless you have a lab test. Well, why is that important? If they look the same, they're all moved by the mites. Well, our varieties respond differently to those viruses. So you might have a variety that's resistant to wheat streak, but it shows symptoms to triticum. And we've been seeing that a lot this year. So as we go through the varieties, we'll talk about the varieties that have performed a little bit better for wheat streak and the ones that maybe are on the more susceptible side. We've seen variety make a really big difference this year, right? So if you have something like Monument out, it's incredibly susceptible, right? So we've seen some really bad examples where Monument has been a total loss to wheat streak. None of the varieties are perfect. Many of them show symptoms, but we've seen really big differences with some of the varieties that tolerate wheat streak a little bit better. You know, our diagnostic lab, I will put a plug in at K-State, tests for the viruses here. They're somewhat simple to diagnose, right, with a visual look. So you can give Sandra a call. She's an expert at this point, unfortunately, at diagnosing wheat streak. But sometimes we need testing to confirm that for other reasons. So K-State Diagnostic Lab does offer that testing, and you can submit the sample through the Post-Rock Extension District. In terms of other diseases, we've actually lucked out a bit. So our rust pressure has been pretty low this year. It was warm and dry in Texas. That's where our stripe rust survives, needs to work its way up here every year. So overall, even though we're picking up a little bit of stripe rust now in certain parts of the state, that rust pressure has been overall low. So that's some good news for our crop this year. So we'll get started with varieties here soon, but before we do, are there any questions for myself or Romulo or just other things that you're seeing that we haven't talked about here?
How many samples have you tested for, Kelsey, number-wise? Because I know we're up.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have the most recent numbers, but it's, I would say 10 times normal this year. Hundreds of samples, right? So, yeah, we've got stacks and stacks of samples for wheat streak this year. Yep. So, that's not the perfect way to tell how much wheat streak's out in the state, but it's a good barometer for how bad it is. Yeah.
I will say I talked to Chandler last week when I was sending a sample. She is the plant diagnostician, right?
Yep.
She said just in 4 days, 4 business days, she got 86 samples, which is more than all the samples last year.
Yes.
So that kind of gives you an idea.
Right. And so we'll have to be very careful going into next year because again, we'll have all these mites active. They'll have these viruses. If they can get to the next crop, we had a lot of wheat streak, especially in this part of state last year. Actually, you know, not as bad as it was this year, but we got a little unlucky this year in terms of weather. So it was, you know, our meteorologist at K-State said it was the 4th warmest fall on record. So what that means is it was really favorable for the mites, right? So those mites could just kind of get to these high populations, stay high, move their way across fields, spread far distances when we had high winds. So we kind of had a perfect storm of factors, I think, that played into what we're seeing this year.
Can both of you talk maybe cover crops and how that kind of goes along with wheat streak mosaic?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have been discussing many things in terms of how have cropping systems changed and how could that be contributing to
Right.
all the weed streak mosaic pressure that we're seeing around the state. Because as Kelsey mentioned, historically it's been a western Kansas concern, but more and more we're seeing it in the central part of the state as well. So a few things, changes in cropping systems that could contribute to that were a lot more double cropping, right? So if you're harvesting wheat and double cropping milo or double cropping soybeans right after, it's probably much harder to control any volunteering there. You can do a good job, but then in the beginning, but maybe later in the season might be a little bit harder, right, to see and control those volunteers, just to get good coverage on herbicide application there. Another thing, Sandra, you mentioned here, cover crops. I think there's two dimensions of the cover crop. One of them is you harvest your wheat, you put a summer cover crop right after, right? Back to back with harvest. Well, in that case, the volunteer is going to emerge in the middle of that cover crop, and probably from the cover crop perspective is going to bring some good benefits to that system, right? We need grasses in that cover crop for a really build soil carbon and so on. But we cannot control the volunteer in that cover crop planted right after wheat harvest. So that's one situation where cover crops can help increase the incidence of volunteer wheat out there, perhaps wheat streak. And then the other one is just early planted winter cereals for cover crops, right? So if we're planting triticale early September, right? Well, we have a handout there. I don't know if triticale is there, but it should be a host, right? Or other winter cereals like that as well, that perhaps they don't show the symptoms, so they are asymptomatic, but upon some sampling, you can find both the mites and many times the virus there as well. So I think in that context, both the summer cover crops and the winter for different reasons, right? But they can harbor the mites and the wheat streak. Now, if you're harvesting soybeans and going with a late planted triticale, for example, you're planting that in November just to provide some cover until March, probably a little bit less risky, I would say, right? Because again, planting date would be late, and you're in the same situation, lower temperatures, not as favorable for the mites. Now, if you're planting early, and we heard from producers this week actually that, well, but I planted my triticale late August, right? Because I didn't think it could harbor the mites, and so that's a pretty hot spot there for the mites as well.
Okay. Can you talk about brome? Because a lot of producers will think that it's coming from the brome. There's a lot of grass waterways, there's a lot of ditches with brome. Could that be an issue?
Yeah, so actually brome, some of our bromes like downy brome are on here. They're reasonably good hosts for the mites. So the thing about wheat curl mites is they really like wheat. They just do their best stuff on wheat. When you put a few on a wheat plant, they get to their highest populations. But some of these other grasses, they can do okay on, right? So if we have really perfect temperatures, those could be sources. Most often we see there's some volunteer in cases that we're doing field visits on, but we have seen cases where there's probably mites coming out of waterways. Now, those are usually lower level infections, right? Because you just don't have the volume of mites coming off of brome and other grasses. But they can be hosts, right? So here you can see smooth brome in our grassy weeds hosts. Yeah, they don't do great on smooth brome. Your mites are gonna be way lower in terms of their reproduction. But if you get the perfect storm, it's not out of the realm of possibility you could have something come from brome, right? So that's a wishy-washy answer. The short answer is could be. Usually there's some volunteer, but if the weather's right, we can see it come from some of these other lower risk grass hosts.
And when you're talking weather right, the temperatures, is it warmer?
Warmer. Mites like warm weather.
Okay.
So we get lucky if it cools down quickly in October. The mite populations, they'll go from, say you have 100, they'll drop off pretty fast. They won't reproduce as fast. They'll slow down. Okay. But if it stays really warm like it did this fall, those mites can continue to reproduce. And so if you have that warm weather, you have a mite colony going, you can see some movement there.
And you talked about the triticale, the rye, and the brome. They don't show the symptoms.
That's important. Yep. So triticale is a little bit of a like a typhoid Mary is what I've heard some people describe it as. So you can get mites going on it. We do pull virus out of it. You can see infection, but it doesn't show the symptoms, right? So you can have a beautiful. We've seen an example of this for a long time in Lane County. There's a field that always gets weed streak, so we have some research plots there, and around it is triticale every year. Well, the triticale looks beautiful, right? But we take it back to the lab, we test it, sure enough, it's full of virus, right? So it's, it's something to definitely keep in mind. They love grasses. The system just loves anything that's a grass. I get the question about corn and milo a lot, too. They do okay, again, on corn and milo. That's not their preferred host. You can see that kind of moves down in priority here. They actually like the grasses that have very thin-bladed leaves because their life cycle is or their life goal, these tiny curl mites, they have very few goals, right? Their goal is to curl the leaf, the weak curl mite, so they can survive in that curled leaf. So with larger leafed grasses like corn and sorghum, when they get older, they can't really curl a corn leaf, right? So it's just not their preferred place to be. We get that question a lot.
And in the end, thinking about it, it's very hard to truly pinpoint where it came from, right? I mean, perhaps we do have some grasses on the ditch that can be our first suspect, right? But, I've been in Kansas since August of 2015, and before that, 5 years in Oklahoma, right? And coming from Brazil, first, I have no idea what a typhoid Mary is. But
well, I took that from Alan Fritz. I actually don't quite know what that is either.
Okay, I feel better. But second is that I noticed that, every now and then in this region, it gets pretty windy, right? So, think about it. I mean, those mice, they won't fly, but they will catch a wind. And so, as windy as we were this last fall, right? And it just, there's no way they can say I came from the ditch, right? Maybe there's a volunteer field 2 miles down the road that, that we are not seeing, and maybe that's where it came from.
Okay. And at that point, it's hard to pin. Oh, sorry.
Has there been any attempt to control mitigate populations with miticides at all in the fall?
There have been a lot of. There's been a lot of research that's looked at that. Unfortunately, none of the miticides are effective. Yeah.
Seed treatments or anything?
Nope. Like a lot of the common seed treatments have a midicloprid, a neonic in it. Does nothing to the mites. In fact, they use it when they're rearing mites in the greenhouse. They can throw a lot of imidacloprid on those plants to control other things, and the mites will stay happy. So, the miticides, they might work, right? If you had a very small colony and you're in a very controlled condition, you can get some impact. But anytime they've done that on a field level, these mites reproduce so fast. You might
have to be a repetitive treatment. You'd have to be every 5 days.
Every 5 days to really knock back the population, and I, anytime they've tried to put it out on a field scale, there's been no effect on the virus, and you only need a very small amount of the mites to actually transmit the virus. So there's just never been anything that's shown effective, unfortunately.
So are there spores on the leaves, or do they get transferred too, or does it have to be active mites to be transferred?
So it has to be mites. Okay. So the mites, when they actually have the virus inside their bodies. It's like just circulating and replicating in their bodies. And anytime they feed, they're injecting the virus into the plant. And then the virus uses the plant's machinery to replicate itself, right? So anywhere the mite goes, it's taking that suite of viruses with it, injecting it into the plant, and then the plant replicates it.
So I guess the next big question is, are the wheat breeders doing more research to get some more resistance built up in some of the newer varieties?
For sure. I know this is a high priority for the breeding program. Ryson can also touch on this too, but I think there are some varieties that are coming down the pipeline that have resistance genes that'll work against multiple viruses. There's one called WSM3. One of the issues with it is right now it brings a little yield drag, right? So, that they can do really well against the viruses, but when they won't maybe stack up the best against some of the highest yielding varieties without that. So I know the work has been to really get the high yielding variety with that gene there. I don't know if you want to say anything else there, Bryson. I know you work with the K-State breeders a lot, so sorry to put you on the spot.
I mean, no, that's, yeah, I don't know how much you talked about like WSM2 so far, but we've got, currently we've got WSM2 and CMC4, which WSM2 gives us good tolerance to wheat streak mosaic virus, but not really good tolerance to any other viruses. The CMC4 gives us some resistance against the curl mite, but it's not something, that instantly kills curl mite. The curl mite can still get in there and reproduce just at a little bit slower rate. And so those can be overcome by the virus, curl mite viruses. There's two other genes called WSM1, which has actually been around for 40 years, but as Kelsey alluded to, there's been quite a bit of yield drag with that. And so they keep working on trying to shorten up the genetic material for that WSM1, and they've got it to a point where they feel really good. And so I think we'll start seeing some materials here in the near future with that WSM1, which gives us good resistance against wheat streak and triticum and high plains, I assume too, but it gives us good resistance against the complex of viruses. And then there's another one called WSM3, which Kelsey alluded to, that is another trait that they found that does give us some good resistance. I think there's some questions on how good on triticum it is, but it does give us a little bit better for sure on the wheat streak. So.
Well, I guess we better start moving the varieties. You can see there's a lot here, but I did cut back like 10 varieties. So we're not going to talk big on either one of them. There are checks every 5 or 6, so we won't talk on those either. I would like to introduce our Polansky seed rep, and he is here as well, so he'll be talking those varieties as well.
Okay, folks, we'll get into the varieties here. I'm going to make a few comments on each one and keep moving. The company reps are going to join us as well as we're talking about their varieties. The first variety, WB Grainfield, probably a variety that doesn't need much introduction. It's been around for a number of years already. I've liked a few things on Grainfield, particularly it seems to me like a good western variety, with good drought tolerance that moves well into central Kansas. That good drought tolerance also has some good acid soil tolerance. Not the best acid soil out here, but it can hang in okay in most conditions, probably 5.5 and above. It's a relatively tall variety, maturity-wise. From here, central and south central Kansas, it tends to act more of a medium late maturing wheat. From here and west, comparable to other varieties out there, it's more of a medium of the pack out here. Again, it's been around for many years. It's one that I've liked in terms of a broad adaptability variety. Of course, Westbred has been phasing it out a little bit more towards some of the other new varieties. But I think it still works for you, and you're willing to put out a fungicide, right? Might be, I still like Grainfield.
Yeah, susceptible to stripe rust and leaf rust and scab, right? So we've got some disease vulnerabilities on Grainfield. Probably we've got some options that could be good replacements if you're still growing Grainfield. Anybody still have Grainfield going here? Yep, so it's been a solid variety. Again, watch it on the diseases. Maybe there's some better options here, maybe not. Maybe you won't find something that can replace it.
Yeah, if you like Grainfield, WB 4422, we're going to talk about it here in a little bit. That's one to keep an eye on as well. Very similar type of variety out there. Folks, LCS Steel AX. So very briefly, the AX terminology here, right, standing for coaxium. That technology is essentially for it's a herbicide tolerance, right? You can use the aggressor herbicide here. We're really trying to go after some of those grassy weeds. Probably you have a cheat or jointed goat grass or other grassy weeds, right? This coaxium technology seems to be doing really good job on controlling those grassy weeds. More of a problem in continuous wheat fields, right? We're not rotating out of it, so crop rotation number 1 tool for weed control. But if you have some problematic fields or if you're buying new land that has some problems there, coaxium could help out. There's a tool on the toolbox, right? The technology, and we do have a few varieties on the coaxium lineup out here. For this region, I tend to like LCS Steel AX. It has chrome on the background. You guys will remember LCS chrome, right? So it brings a few traits there similar to chrome. It has one of them is a pretty good standability. Haven't necessarily seen LCS Steel AX fall down its face there. Good drought tolerance on this variety here as well. One thing that we've seen with steel is despite its late maturity, being similar to that chrome, it does seem to hang in okay under heat stress there. So we haven't necessarily seen it lose too much test weight under those conditions. Beyond chrome, it also has bird on the background, Colorado State variety bird, so that contributes to its drought tolerance.
Right, the kind of tallest, latest of the coaxiums that we'll talk about today did pretty well in the performance tests in North Central over the last 3 years in that summary. Very susceptible to stripe rust, leaf rust, and stem rust, right? So those are key watch outs here. Very susceptible, needs to be watched for a fungicide in a year like last year where we did have the rusts active.
Folks, WB 4401, so very briefly here going over, as I mentioned, right, Westbred moved away from naming varieties to actually numbering them. And so the very first number here, number 4, is going to be just every wheat in this region should start with a 4 for their numbering system. This just tells us it's a hard red winter wheat. If you go to North Dakota, you're probably starting with a 9 up there because that's a hard red spring wheat kind of, right? Second number is one that you can be taking a look at. This one gives you an idea of relative maturity. So 1 being an early maturing variety, 9 being a late maturing variety. So 4 here tells us it's a medium early. Right? Third year also gives us some information. Third number also gives us some information. It's the year of release. So we've seen this variety here since 2020, right? It's been around for a few years now. Then last year is just a random number there to give this variety a unique identity. Okay, 4401. So this variety, as soon as it was released, it had some really good yields, especially probably in that I-35 region, right? So a little bit further east from where we are here. Again, very first year it was very strong on yields, second year as well, and then it has been more variable since then, right? We have not seen 4401 just be consistent in those very high yield conditions, right? Or top yielding group there. And I think part of that is it's a variety that doesn't offer much in terms of drought tolerance. There's probably better, more widely adapted materials there to look for something that is very good in terms of drought tolerance, right? It's a little bit weak on the knees as well in terms of if it gets pretty tall, you can see it leaning out there, so that perhaps didn't contribute to its yield record either. So my feeling is that we are a little bit too far west for where I like 4401. Even within the Westbred lineup, I think we have some better options for out here.
Yeah, one plus side of this variety released in 2020 is that it does have a good disease package, right? So good on leaf and stripe rust, good on scab, kind of intermediate on wheat streak mosaic, so it can hang a little better than others, although kind of intermediate to susceptible there. I think when it was released, Westbred was really pushing that kind of solid disease package, you know, as one of the calling cards here. I know a lot of folks planted it, you know, if they really didn't want to spray a fungicide, or maybe they were planting after corn, they had high scab risk, right? And you can save that fungicide for that flowering path. But again, maybe some better options here as we move down the lineup.
I have a comment. I did a lot of behind beans, and if we're going down through here, if there's something that worked good for that.
That's a great question there. We'll start highlighting that, right? So essentially, these cropping systems that we have today that we were discussing earlier, right? They require fine-tuning on the variety there as well. So going after beans, you want something that teeter really well. You want something that has a good drought tolerance, right? And perhaps something that is not too late, right? And so, yes, we can highlight that as well. There are varieties out here that we can recommend them after corn, and they do very well there, but they might not be the best one after beans. So we'll be highlighting them.
So 4401, maybe you mentioned, right, it breaks dormancy. So it actually is one that you can plant a little bit later. I think it breaks dormancy early, so.
Yeah, so on 4401, it does break dormancy early. I think that, and if you're planting it too early, you will be more exposed to some freeze damage here and there. So it's one that I would not necessarily go on the early side of the window. I'll plant other varieties first.
Yeah, so I'll hop in real quick and talk about KS Mako. This was a 23 release out of the Manhattan program. It's one that, when you look at some of its attributes, it's got very good drought tolerance. For a Manhattan program, it's actually probably got some of the best drought tolerance we've got. And then it carries what we call as the WSM2 gene that we mentioned earlier. So for essentially adapted variety, it's going to have some of the best wheat streak mosaic virus tolerance. We talked about it. That gene is not bulletproof. If you get triticum, it's still probably going to be showing symptoms of the complex with a heavy triticum pressure. But as far as wheat streak mosaic virus, Mako is going to have really good tolerance there. For leaf rust and stripe rust, it's going to be a little bit more on the intermediate to moderately susceptible side. So if we have a heavy stripe rust or heavy leaf rust year, you will need to be spraying Mako with a fungicide. Other than that, it's got a really good quality. It's on Graincraft's preferred variety list. I don't know how many people are able to take advantage of some of those quality premiums that we've got out there, but Mako would be a good option for that. And it does have above average protein. And so if you got a protein market, it could be an opportunity there as well with Mako. You mentioned after beans, Mako is a little bit higher tilling variety. It has good drought tolerance, and I've heard from a lot of the guys growing it that it's quick to get out of the ground and start growing there in the fall. So I don't have a lot of data on it for after soybeans, but it might be a good option just based off of some of the characteristics.
Save the seed.
Yes, you can save the seed of KS Mako. So we do have some from K-State that you can't save, and I'll make sure to point those out as we go through them. But
And important to point out, right, K-State breeding program in Manhattan, the majority of their sites is after beans. So we have been selected under that pressure after beans as well there. So I think it would be a good one in those conditions.
So I went back and looked. We've only had Mako in the variety performance trials for 2 years, but for Northwest and North Central Kansas, we've had 8 locations, and Mako is the top yielding line across those 8 locations over 2 years. So I think it would be a really good fit up here in this area.
Bryson, can you explain that Graincraft quality thing? Because in the wheat book, the new wheat book, a lot of them say that, and I didn't know what it was.
So everybody familiar with who Graincraft is? So they're a private flour miller. They're the largest private flour miller in the U.S. And they've got a location down in Wichita, but they've got locations all over the U.S. They actually have a quality, what do they call it, quality inspection lab there in the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center in Manhattan. And so the breeders work from all the programs work really closely with Graincraft on getting them samples of their newer varieties as they're coming through the program and getting them to that quality inspection lab there in the Manhattan building. And so then they run it through all sorts of different tests. They put it through farinograph, stability test. They see how it mills, they see how it absorbs water, and then they actually bake it. They actually look at how the loaf, loaf of bread that sample actually makes, how it looks. And so they put it all through there, and then they have certain specs that they want to hit on all these different tests. And if a variety's meeting certain specs, it's going to get put on their preferred variety list. And sometimes there are opportunities that they're paying a little bit more for certain varieties on that list. So I know there's some, if you're closer to Graincraft, you can deliver directly to Graincraft, but I do know there's some cooperatives around the state that work with them. I think Schooler's one that kind of works through their program. If you can deliver to Schooler, then they would get it down to Graincraft. So I know it's not available to everybody, but if you do have an opportunity to take advantage of it, it's definitely something to look at. I know wheat's not worth a lot, but if you could get 25 cents or 50 cents more, it'd be worth it. The issue I've had in the past with some of the Graincraft preferred variety lists is they're older varieties. Their varieties, it seems like in the past they've kind of taken a while to get some of the newer varieties on there. I will say they're working a lot better on getting new varieties on there as soon as they can, so then when the seed's available to farmers, hopefully they're on the list and you have that indication for you to decide if it's worth it or not. So yeah, Mako, like I said, would be a good one. You know, it's a higher yielding line with that quality. I know like Monument's been definitely one of the ones they've really preferred on that list. Well, Monument maybe is starting to dwindle a little bit on yield. I do know in certain circumstances it still works really well. So, does that answer?
Yes, Bryce mentioned, right, that's why Monument. Monument has been around since about 2014, right? So it's got over 10 years of since its release out there, so definitely getting some age, right? But with that, it's still number 2 most planted wheat in the state. It had been number 1 for a number of years, probably about 4 years or so, most widely planted wheat in the state, and right now it's number 2, just behind SY Wolverine. That I think we have it following down there. So I'm gonna keep a little bit brief because it's an old one. If it still works for you, that's okay. There might be a couple of watch outs there that Kelsey can highlight for us here, but it has been a solid variety, right? Does it still have the yield potential some of these other varieties out here, newer ones, have? Probably not. Kind of showing up that it's gonna be more maybe on that average of the pack, very stable variety, right? You can kind of count of it most years there, but again, maybe not the same high top-end yield potential that some other varieties in these lineups here may have. Two things that contributed to its wide adaptability here were good acid soil tolerance, so it handles low pH very well. It also has a decent drought tolerance. So I mentioned Grainfield being a western variety that moves central very well. Monument, I think of it the other way around. I think it's a central variety, but it does move west fairly well, right? That makes sense, right? Good tillering ability, so it has done really well on those systems after beans, right? Planting late there, still tillering out quite a bit, and the combination of high tiller with good drought tolerance has favored it after beans. It's going to be a little bit on the medium-late side for maturity, so that here is not necessarily a concern. As we go south, I'll be a little bit more concerned of it being too late, getting caught on the heat there during grain peeling more than some other varieties. And standability can be average, right? So it doesn't, if you're going to really push for yields, bottom ground, high fertility, it might go down. Now, after beans, we are usually already restricted on height anyway, right? And so no problems with standability if you're pushing it on the late planting and tougher conditions after beans there.
Yeah, so on Monument, you probably have lots of experience with it, but on the intermediate to susceptible side for stripe frost, we've seen that kind of shift over the years here, and it is one of our more susceptible varieties here for wheat streak mosaic virus. So a lot of the calls we're getting out to fields that are decimated are Monument, right? So just to watch out there, there might be some better options that will tolerate that virus better.
And that's a really good comment, right? I mean, nowadays you have so many varieties to choose from. And especially here, right, Sandra, where you are, this transition, you might be able to make, eastern varieties and central varieties work. You might be able to make central and western varieties work as well, right? So you have so many options that Sandra has a hard time cutting down the varieties, right? One to start with, but then you can be picky, right? You have something that will just give up on a wheat streak mosaic year like these, like Monument can, or like Ahearn, or like Bobdo, or some other varieties can as well. Well, that's a big red flag, right? Probably I would start moving away from that, especially since we're seeing more and more wheat streak mosaic epidemics in the state.
Yeah, so KS Dallas was a 2019 release out of the Hayes program. Traditionally, when we think Hayes, we think Western Kansas type varieties. And Dallas has been a really strong variety for us in Northwest Kansas. Went back and looked at yield performance here, average over 4 years in Northwest Kansas. Dallas has been the top variety in those locations. So, been a really strong variety. It's a really good drought, dry land type variety. Just kind of one that handles a lot of tough situations and does really well under kind of stressful environments. And we have seen it move a little bit this direction. I would say we're probably a little bit on the eastern edge of it, but if you're looking for a good kind of drought, dry land type environment, KS Dallas might fit the bill there. It does have the WSM2 gene in it, so it gives you good wheat streak mosaic virus tolerance. But we do get calls, it seems like every year, where people are like, hey, my Dallas is yellow, what's going on? Well, it turns out to be triticum mosaic virus. So still susceptible on that side, but if you're dealing with just wheat streak, it is a good option there. stripe rust is going to be more on that moderately susceptible side. It's got good moderate resistance to leaf rust though. So like I said, it's just been a good kind of tough variety for us in northwest Kansas. I will say another watch out is going to be straw strength. If you get into some higher yielding situations, it probably will fall down on you.
AG Golden, variety from Mexico here, licensed through them. AG Golden has been around since about 2021. We've seen it a few times out here. A variety that was positioned more towards the western third of the state, perhaps expanding down to about where we are here, so more of like a western variety out there. Good standability, it seems to do okay on acid soils. We're measuring coleoptile length in these varieties. It does have a decent coleoptile. I do have a comment here for winter kill. We've seen it, Sandra, in your plots a couple of years back when we had a very severe winter kill in the region, right? Temperatures got to -40, the soils were super dry, and there was no snow cover, right? Perfect combination there for winter kill. It did not take it too well, right? It was one of the ones that I have a note here that it was affected a little bit more than some other varieties there. It's going to be a medium to medium late maturing variety, medium to medium short in terms of height. And again, in the western third of the state, it does have an okay yield record out there. You know, probably a little bit further west than where we are, yield record may be okay. Any watch outs, Kelsey, on the disease side here?
Yeah, so leaf and stripe rust, it's on the more susceptible side. We're still trying to get a good feel for its wheat streak mosaic reaction.
AP, Bigfoot, Sandra, I really like that you have them side by side because I have a note from that same winter that he handled super well.
Oh.
So we have two contrasting varieties here in terms of winter hardiness, given that it was just 1 year that we have from observations, right? But if, we had those observations for at least 3 plots with Sandra here. And so AP Bigfoot is a variety that they're putting out. Again, the name suggests, right, very wide, broad area of adaptability. Background on AP Bigfoot here, it's got some TAM 112. The TAM 112 brings a really decent drought tolerance to the table here. It also has SY Wolf. I think that SY Wolf was quite widely used in this region here a few years back there, and some Colorado experimental. So again, with that combination, right, a very good drought tolerance on AP Bigfoot out here. Does decent on low soil pH as well. In our yield data, it's been a little bit less consistent. I have talked to growers who really like Bigfoot, and they have been growing it for a couple or 3 years now. In our yield data, it was a bit more variable, right? It was kind of like towards the top in a few trials. Next trial was in the bottom, so a little bit more yield variability in our yield records than what we'd like to see. But again, some growers have really liked the AP Bigfoot. Syngenta is putting it out as a very large area adaptability from Texas to South Dakota. I think it might be a little bit narrower than that. But comments on disease?
Yeah, intermediate for leaf rust, more susceptible to stripe rust, right? So that would be something to watch. Moderate to susceptible for wheat streak. It's not the worst. It's not at monuments level, but from what we've seen, it can still have symptoms. Okay on scab. So I don't know. Is anybody worried about scab? Are we going after corn? Right?
Yeah.
So that would be, maybe an option that we have in the lineup here that could go after corn if we're worried about it. Corn that could go after these, I think you already mentioned.
Yep. Up next, folks, we have RockStar.
Pat.
Pat's going to make a few comments on RockStar.
Go ahead and tell them what you think about it, and I'll just make a few comments then after.
Okay, absolutely. So folks, RockStar has been a pretty solid variety for kind of the entire central corridor of the state here. We've seen it since about 2019, so we have a number of years of data on it, and it has been pretty consistently in that kind of top third. Decent standability on RockStar, handles acid soils quite well as well. Again, just yield record has been pretty good. One of the things that I've liked the most on RockStar is probably the leaf health that it has. I always give the example from last year. We're in a plot in Hayesville, south central Kansas, and from 28 varieties out there, most of the leaves were taken by stripe rust. Whatever was not taken by stripe rust had leaf rust on it. And RockStar was doing just fine. Like, it was looking really good out there. There was a couple of other varieties with also really good leaf health that were still standing quite well. But again, a variety that I think could be in the short list here. Kelsey, what do we know about the disease here beyond the leaf health, right? I guess I kind of stole the thunder. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. I'll double down on that. So,
right.
Good leaf and stripe rust, as Romulo mentioned, right? It's a variety that seems to hold its canopy health pretty well, right? Also pretty good for leaf spotting diseases if you're wheat after wheat, right? And you have tan spot issues, that could be an option. It also has a pretty good scab package, right? So if you're going after corn, RockStar could be an option. It seems to have some tolerance for wheat streak mosaic, so it's not going to be the worst variety here by any means for wheat streak. So again, just that's a pretty solid disease package that we have here in RockStar. Pat, did we miss anything that you want to mention?
Well, I'll just tell you a little bit about how it's performed, basically, K-State trials and different things like that. As you mentioned, the top two varieties planted across the state this year are SY Wolverine and Monument, and then there's a tie for third. And RockStar's the number 5 variety in the state. If you look at those varieties, which ones are climbing, which ones are dropping, this is the second fastest growing one in the state as far as gaining acres and gaining percentage. So, a lot of the things that they talked about is a good reason why it's gaining in popularity. Very healthy plant. In about any situation, you can go different pH or whatever type of thing. It's well-rounded. So this variety has been tested in 83 K-State and University of Nebraska trials over the last 6 years, and it has won in 17 different counties in Kansas. So overall, you take all of the yields, 105% of the test average of all of those plots. Now the other thing is you look at how consistent it is. And so I looked last year at the varieties trialed in the K-State plots. There was 17 of them that I had a really good group that was all in those plots. And so I looked at everything that was like 98% of the test average and above. And RockStar was in the 98 or above 87% of the time. And so that was, if you look at all those, that was the third highest consistency rating is what I would call it of anything. So a very consistent variety. You can plant it on beans, you can plant it after corn. It's above average on the Fusarium head blight. And so very well-rounded variety that a person should be planting. One other quick variety we don't have in here, a couple years older than this one, is Paradise. Paradise has done very well across this region. Right now it's super hot down in north central Oklahoma. They just love it down in there. It's still one of our highest yielding varieties as we plant it. But that one happens to be Paradise is on the Grainfield quality list. It still has a very decent leaf health package to it, and it has a very good history across Kansas as far as being in the K-State trials and how it's done.
Thanks, Pat. Next variety, folks, PS Elevate. Actually, this here should read PS 1985,
Correct,
right?
correct.
Yep. You're gonna tell us a little bit about it?
You probably know as much as I do.
Yeah, he just started a couple months ago, so
Okay.
he kind of wants you to do
I'll be
it.
honest, I have
Just as
to
new as
cheat
it
here.
is, so.
I need to find my notes what I had on PS Elevate because we have seen only a handful of times.
Yeah, it's
But,
only been out for a year, so.
Yeah, so obviously, right, what you're looking at it here is a allness variety, different from most of other varieties that we have in this region. PS Elevate, based on what we're seeing, PS 1985, right? Apparently when they were registering PS Elevate, they noticed there's a spring wheat variety with that name already, so they have to change it to 1985, which is the year when Phillips Seed was founded. A few things that we've seen here this year, maturity-wise, it seems to be a little bit on the late side, kind of like a medium-late maturing variety based on comparative ratings with others here. Medium-short as well. The reps last night were saying they released it based on a yield level. Of course, being an allness variety like this can also be used for cattle, right, hay or grazing. So I guess we don't have yield data on it of our own yet. They were fairly excited with the yield performance that it was having. If I remember right, they said it was okay on acid soils, right, and an okay disease package as well.
So again, we're going to see it this year. We'll have much more information from K-State. They are saying, yes, could be good for acid soils. Could go after beans and corn, I think.
Correct.
From Phillips, good or intermediate there for scab, right? So that could be an option, and good leaf health. So again, let's take a look at it. We'll hopefully have a lot more ratings after this year and more information there. We did get a comment right on test weight that it should hold the test weight okay, even though it's on list, right? But maybe you're gonna, well, it looks like you're gonna talk about that right now.
Yep, exactly. We're on the same page. So, so folks, just a quick comment, right? You know, most of our varieties, they will have beards on them, and now we're looking at a non-less variety, right? So what's different here? What can we expect, right, from the grain perspective? So think that if these were two varieties, they were exactly same genetics. Everything else is the same. The only difference is that this one has awns, this one does not, right? There is a physiological cost for the plants to produce these awns here. Whenever the stem is elongating, right after spring, their stem is elongating. There is a lot of competition for, there's a lot of sink going on in that plant, right? There's a lot of competition because leaves are being created, the stems being elongated, the heads being formed. If you have awns, the awns are being formed too, right? So there is a physiological cost of putting out these awns. What that does is we have fewer grains per head, usually, if we have an awn variety. Beards are there, that head is likely going to carry less grains than this head out here. Now, with that said, to put too many grains in a head, it's harder to keep up the test weight, right? It's just a lot more competition for keeping up high test weights in an all-less variety because there's more grains out there, right? So that's just a little bit there of the physiology of comparison of these two plants here. If they were the exact same variety, genetics and everything, with these being the only difference between them. So usually in all-less varieties, we tend to see lower test weights. But as long as it is still acceptable, no 60 plus there, it might not be a concern. So those niches, but outside of there, I probably wouldn't put it, right? So you can see it just by looking at 4699. It's a short variety, excellent standability, right? And that tells us kind of where it goes usually, right? If we're gonna push to have a you know, high fertility bottom ground, or you're gonna irrigate that field, right? You're going, say you have a circle of corn and you harvest, you're gonna go, you want something that will give you a really high yield potential, really high yielding conditions. This one is one that should probably give you that. Very high yield potential, 4699. Part of that is also because it has less protein, right? So there's a trade-off. Protein is very expensive for the plant to produce. You put a lot of starch in the grain, you dilute that protein. So 4699 is a high yield, low protein variety, excellent standability, medium late in terms of maturity, right? Medium late, the 6, released back in 2019. So again, in that situation, I still like 4699. I think out here, you know, in a fallow ground or under irrigation, if you're going to put after corn, it's probably one that could do really well. Dry land, I probably wouldn't put it because it doesn't have the best drought tolerance out there. Very high killering ability. The yield comes from a lot of small heads on this variety out here. What about diseases? Well, before diseases, not much on acid soils either. So if you're going to push, you kind of need to bring the pH up as well, right? So I wouldn't put it on acid soils. But again, if you're babysitting it, you can have some really good yield potential.
So you mentioned pivot after corn, right? So it does have a good scab rating. So that could be a good option. That's where we're worried about scab maybe the most, right? When we're after corn under pivot. Weak on stripe rust too, so that might be an option, right? So if you're really pushing it, you might again need that fungicide application. A little bit better on leaf rust, and it's a variety that we've seen kind of has some tolerance to wheat streak. I wouldn't call it the best, but it's one that stood up a little bit better than others for that wheat streak mosaic virus.
Folks, AP Prolific is a newer variety out of again the Syngenta lineup there. AP Prolific is about half average on the background. It's a variety that, you know, in the central corridor of the state, it has done really well. Very high fillering ability on prolific. That's kind of where the name comes from. It's a variety that, you know, it's kind of
With that Gallagher, with those OSU genetics in the background of it, it's going to be that grazing potential. It's got good grazing potential and good dual purpose. So if you're doing graze and grain, it definitely would be a good option there to look at Ahearn. Probably the best option that K-State has as far as a variety goes. Kelsey, you want to talk about wheat streak on it?
Oh, sorry, Bryson. I didn't mean to steal your thunder
No.
there. So I just wanted to take a little tiny intermission to show some examples of wheat streak mosaic, right? We have wheat streak mosaic throughout the plots here. But sometimes we're getting questions, oh, is it wheat streak mosaic? Is it stripe rust? Sometimes the earlier symptoms look a little bit more like stripe rust. So mosaic has this very classic mosaic pattern. It's kind of a striping, kind of a mosaic. It's green and yellow there. And it's different than stripe rust, right? Because you can't rub it off. It's usually not dark brown spots, right? So here's kind of a good classic example of wheat streak. It can look a little bit different depending on variety, so I'd encourage you to take a look out there in the field. You can see some different examples of wheat streak here. But again, once you know what you're looking for, it's not a hard one to diagnose. So here's just some examples of wheat streak. I'll turn things back over to Romulo and I'll keep showing some examples here.
sounds like a plan. So folks, next variety that we have, SY Wolverine. So I mentioned earlier that Wolverine was the #1 planted wheat in the state. So that's the variety out here. Wolverine is a medium early maturing variety. It's medium to medium tall, but with really good standability. Straw strength is typically really good. Wolverine has a very high yield potential. If we're really pushing things, it will respond, and it has a high top end yield. And it combines that also with some good drought tolerance. So it brings that drought tolerance as well. Background of Wolverine is SY Wolf, flat and Everest. One concern would be low soil pH, right? So in acid soils, I would not put Wolverine there. Another concern can be thrashability. So we hear from growers, right? In our own research, we are using a 5-foot header in our combines, right? So that's it, those very little plots, right? So we can't tell in terms of thrashability because we're harvesting 800 plots at once, right? But from growers we hear that it can be hard to thrash, so that can be a concern on Wolverine as well. Another thing very quickly that I have here, and we can pass around, is what we call leaf tip dieback. This here is a condition I've been called in a field of Wolverine in Sumner County before, irrigated field, very high yield potential. Every single flag leaf, the tip was dying back, right? And we can see here as well, many times when we look at Wolverine, we have these symptoms. This is, some varieties show this, it's genetic and is a response to some environmental conditions. You should not bring any yield loss that we'll be concerned with. But if you see this flag leaf tip dying back, that's very typical from this variety, from a few of the other varieties out there as well. One concern with SY Wolverine is stripe rust.
No, I don't want that in here. It didn't go through the lawn.
Like leaf tip dying back there. So stripe rust will be a concern. Kelsey actually uses this variety, Wolverine, as a susceptible check in all of our fungicide trials, because if stripe rust is in the county, it's going to get it. So again, this here is not stripe rust, it's flag leaf tip dieback, right? Just a physiological response to some environmental conditions that we might have every now and then. Some varieties show this much worse than others. With that concern on stripe rust, Wolverine does seem to handle better wheat streak mosaic virus. Not something that we know the mechanism behind, but it does seem to handle better some wheat streak mosaic viruses like this.
Okay.
Very good. Kelsey's very distracted there, so it made me work harder this time and talking to Jesus too.
Sorry, Romulo.
Okay, KS WB4422. So folks, early on I mentioned that if you have Grainfield, right, these might be ones to take a look at. Just a reminder, this is the variety that I was talking about. So WB4422, it's a medium early maturing variety. So it might be a notch earlier than what we have in WB Grainfield back there, released back in 2022. Yield record in north central to northwest part of the state has been pretty solid on 4422. And last year it did well even far down south in the south central part of the state. So it's another one of those varieties that is more like a western variety with a good, that moves well into central Kansas. Good standability, medium height. And again, yield performance on 4422 has been pretty solid in this region here. It is going to be a certified seed only, right? So that's a big difference from Grainfield, like Grainfield, and you know, it's in your saving seed, right? You will not be able to save seed on these ones. So that'll be a big difference. But again, it has been a solid yielding variety in this part of the state out here. Yield performance has been pretty good. What about disease on 4422, Kelsey?
So the major watch out is stripe rust. So this will be one of the more susceptible varieties we have here for stripe rust. It's not the best scab option in the West Bred lineup, right? We have better things if scab is the concern. It is one that's held up better for wheat streak mosaic, and we're seeing that kind of as we go through the plots. We've seen some examples where 4422 seems to tolerate that infection a little bit better. So some pros and cons there on the disease package of this variety.
And I guess there were some comments earlier about varieties after soybeans, right? So this variety here, it will have a better, like a better growth in the fall than what we had Grainfield. Grainfield produced a lot of forage, but it was a little bit slow starting, right? Seems like 4422 takes on a little bit better there, and that drought tolerance also brings it as a good low system. So might be one to take a look there.
The next variety we have is KS Western Star. This was a 2019 release out of the Hayes program. It's half bird in its pedigree, which is a Colorado State variety. Traditionally, when we think bird, we think of really good drought tolerance, and Western Star has really good drought tolerance from that bird pedigree. It does carry soil-borne mosaic virus resistance, so you know, for a variety to work in central Kansas, eastern Kansas, we need that soil-borne resistance. That has allowed Western Star to move a little bit further east than some of the other Hayes varieties. In fact, I've got some guys down like Great Bend, Larned area that really like Western Star with that drought tolerance and stress performance in it down in that area. It's a medium maturity, kind of medium tall plant height on it. As far as disease resistances go, it's more in that intermediate to leaf rust and stripe rust. I will say, you know, for the lack of stripe rust we've had this year, we're probably picking up a little bit more stripe rust in Western Star for some reason this year. So might just be something we need to keep an eye on it. It does carry the CMC4 gene, which is going to give you some tolerance to the wheat curl mite. So we'll slow down that wheat curl mite. I will say though that if we have a heavy enough pressure, wheat streak is pretty, or Western Star is pretty susceptible to wheat streak, and so we can see some pretty hot fields, yellow fields of Western Star on some heavy pressures. So good quality on it. And for Western Kansas, a variety out of the Hayes program, it actually has decent scab tolerance. So if you're going in after corn, could be an option there as well. Next one is KS Bill Snyder. This was a 23 release out of the Hayes program as well, but it's one that's had really broad adaptability. You know, it's done really well in Western Kansas on both irrigated and dryland. And then when we tested it in central Kansas, it's done really well in central Kansas too. We'll be talking about Providence and how it's been kind of the go-to variety for us in central Kansas. Bill Snyder's actually been beating Providence in a lot of trials in central Kansas for us. So really good yield potential, broad adaptability on it. It's a medium maturity. We call it a medium short. You know, it gets a little, some of my guys are a little bit more concerned as we move west with it, just height-wise. But I will say in some pretty drought-stressed environments, it seems to hold its height really well. So it doesn't get super short on you. Good disease package on it. It's moderately resistant to stripe rust, more intermediate on leaf rust. It does carry the WSM2 gene, so it gives you good wheat streak mosaic virus tolerance. And then the breeder Gurong says it has some tolerance to triticum. We're still trying to figure out exactly how much tolerance to triticum, but it does seem to have some tolerance to the triticum mosaic virus as well. A high tillering capacity on it. It doesn't put out big heads, but it just puts out a lot of them, and really good quality. It's on the Graincraft preferred variety list as well. Really, like I said, it's just been a really high yielding for us with some good drought tolerance and pretty broad adaptability on it. That's worked well in western and central Kansas. Got asked earlier, this one is a single season use. That's our version of a certified seed only. So you will be required, as of now, to continue to purchase certified seed of this one every year. The High Country here is another Polansky variety that we came out with about 5 years ago now. And it's named High Country because it is designed for the western half of Kansas, or in areas that get a little bit less annual precipitation. And so that's kind of the targeted area for this variety. It doesn't have any specific traits that would make it a worse variety to plant east of 81 Highway or in the east than what the average variety would. But it is targeted. We had some other varieties for this area, so we were looking for something out there. So it has been tested for 4 years in 45 K-State trials. It has 11 wins in those 45 trials, and it has also done well in the drier environments up in the University of Nebraska-Lincoln trials. And so this variety has stood up very well in those areas, 19 to 21 inches of annual rainfall. It's an earlier variety. It has a pretty decent overall leaf health package. Not quite as good on the striped rust as a couple of our other varieties, a few of our other varieties, but it's okay. It's not poor by any means. So this is the area kind of as you're transitioning towards the west, where a person can be looking at this variety. And so I'm glad to see it in this trial. To give everybody a good look at it. Looks pretty decent right here, I would say.
Thanks, Pat. Folks, LCS Raider. So Raider, we received it as an experimental back in 2022. Then we got some new data 2023, 2024 there as well. It has done well in the western part of the state in terms of yield performance. It was kind of like a top end there in 2023. In 2022, it was very good as an experimental as well. So it's one that I think shows some promise for this part of the state out here. A couple of things that I have in terms of maturity. It's going to be a medium early. Height, as you can see, is going to be a medium to medium short variety out here. Good standability on LCS Raider. Very good standability and straw strength. They are positioning it more as from the central corridor going west, right? So probably again from this region here and moving west. Let's see what it does this year. A couple of years on yield data that we have seem to be pretty good. We've got a couple of comments here that seems to do well on acid soils. Just gonna be average on test weight and protein. What about disease on Raider, Kelsey?
We've had some limited looks. It seems intermediate for stripe rust. Leaf rust, it would be very susceptible, right? So in those years, leaf rust takes off early. We might be worried. Wheat streak, it's just moderate to maybe on the susceptible side. So that would be a watch out there with radar.
Let's get Grainfield. Next variety LCS Helix AX. So another one, another coaxium variety out of the Lima grain. We talked about Steel AX in the past, right? Here, Helix AX. This variety here, it's going to be a medium early maturing variety. Another one with a very heavy background on the Colorado State program. So some bird on the background on Helix here. Medium early maturing variety, decent standability, decent on acid soils as well. Yield performance, it has been one that has shown up towards the top out here. So again, between Helix and Steel, both of them have shown up kind of like towards the top in the north central part of the state here. So perhaps one, if you need the coaxium technology, that could be an option. I think it has been a little bit more, it has a higher yield potential maybe than steel, but a little bit more variable yields as well, at least based on our trial data. Good in terms of standability, I have a comment that can be on the average side here. What about disease on Helix, Kelsey?
Yeah, so intermediate to stripe rust. Again, this one is actually susceptible to leaf rust, so that could be a watch out there. Intermediate to weed streak, so we've seen it with a good amount of symptoms in some of the cases we've seen over the last couple of years, but it seems to hold on to some yield, right? So again, just intermediate to more susceptible for wheat streak. Is anyone using coaxium varieties? Is that, we're thinking about coaxium, right? So yeah, Helix and then steel would probably be, and then we have AX here.
Which varieties are you guys using?
I just know about the technology. I don't really know much on the variety side, what they've been using in the past.
AP18.
The last K-State variety we have here is KS Providence. It was a 22 release out of the Manhattan program. It's one that, like I said, mentioned earlier, for central Kansas, it's definitely been our go-to variety here for the last few years. Really consistent yielder, very strong yielder. We've seen it work well, like I said, all across central Kansas and down into Oklahoma, and we've actually seen it perform well as we move out into northwest Kansas. I mentioned earlier, Mako, last 2 years, looking at Northwest and North Central, has been #1. Providence was right behind it at #2. So has done really well up here in this northern, North Central and Northwest part of the state. Good disease package, is good resistant to leaf rust, more intermediate on stripe rust. It does have intermediate scab tolerance, and so not as good as something like Everest, but it's going to be probably a notch below that. Give you a good option there if you're going in after corn. I will say on that stripe rust, it does seem to be a little bit slower to get going on it, so may allow you to delay that fungicide application and go after a good fungicide scab timing with it. It does have some background tolerance to wheat streak. It's not going to be as good as something with the WSN2 gene, but if you're dealing with a light pressure of wheat streak, it'll probably be a good enough tolerance to get you by. Not the best quality on it. It's acceptable. Not going to be on any preferred variety list there. Really, like I said, it's consistent yield, strong yield that we've seen on it across this central part of the state that's made it a really strong variety for us. Is anybody growing Providence around? Few hands. Yeah. Like I said, it's definitely our go-to variety here, central Kansas, and like I said, I've had some guys like it going west too.
How are you looking for you there? Did you?
Well, this is our first year to have it.
I know when Alan's asked about a variety for after beans, he kind of points to Providence out of his program. So I will say it does have spring wheat in the background of it. Winter hardiness hasn't been a concern with that spring wheat, but we have seen, with these March and dry Marches and Aprils that we've had, Providence relies a little bit more on those spring tillers, and so we have had some issues with these drier Marches and Aprils that have kind of dinged Providence in different spots. So just kind of maybe a watch out there on Providence.
AP18 AX, right? Another coaxium variety. This one out of the AgriPro program. It was released back in 2018. They just last year had the AP24 AX. That is a newer release. So we can kind of talk about both at the same time here. This 24AX kind of came as a replacement to AP18AX. So very heavy on the bird background again from Colorado. About 2/3 of the variety here will be coming from that bird background. 18AX is a medium early maturing variety. The 24AX is going to be more like medium. Maybe a couple of days later than what we have on 18AX. This is a medium to medium tall here variety, and 24AX is going to be more consistently a medium tall, right? So it's slightly later and slightly taller than what we have on 18AX. The main change from the 18 to the 24 is really, they're calling it kind of the new generation of the coaxium varieties in terms of having a better, well, sometimes we apply the aggressor herbicide, we can see a little bit of a knockback in the crop, so it's less sensitive to that impact of the aggressor herbicide compared to the 18AX here at least. Acid soil is not going to be really good on those conditions, but it does have a pretty decent standability, and really good drought tolerance here on the 18AX. Comments on the disease package?
Yeah, so intermediate on stripe rust, if we're talking about that transition to 24AX, right, the next generation that Romulo was just mentioning, probably 24AX is a notch worse on stripe rust, so something to just keep in mind there. These aren't the best scab options, so if you're, actually we don't have great options for scab in terms of coaxium, so that's a watch out there. Wheat streak mosaic, I believe 18AX and 24AX have that curl mite gene, so they seem to have some tolerance, they slow down that curl mite, they seem to have some tolerance, but again will be symptomatic for wheat streak.
And last variety that we have here, Golden Hawk. Can make a few comments here, Pat.
Sure. So Golden Hawk is our fourth variety that we have, and this was a new release last year, and so I am very, very excited about this variety because we entered it. Usually when we have new varieties, if they're going to be a fit or possible fit for the entire state of Kansas, we enter them in every K-State trial. And so that's what we did with this variety, and we also did that again, I believe, for this upcoming year that is growing. And so, kind of as I mentioned a little bit, you know, with how the RockStar has done and the consistency and some things like that, when we were looking for variety, the target for this one was to have as wide of a footprint in Kansas as possible, but something that's going to be very, very consistent and be a very good yielder. And with the idea that Monument had been number one for lots of years, it's going to be dropping off. We want something that's going to be consistent like Monument, that can take its place but have a much better package overall. So that's kind of what, kind of how I am targeting this variety, is to think about something along that line. So how did it perform last year? So in the all of the K-State trials, and we also entered it in all the University of Nebraska trials that were north of here, not clear out in their panhandle. So 22 trials, it averaged 106% of all of the plots. So it had 8 K-State and UNL wins last year. And so when I was talking about, you know, looking at all of that data and how it compares, you know, the same 17 trials just in the K-State plots, and is it a consistent variety, or how does it yield? Well, you know, so the RockStar was 87%, you know, and you look at just as a comparison in those same deals, you know, we talked a little bit about the 44-22 over there. That one, only 47% of the time was above 98%. So less than half of the time it averaged 99% when you average them all up. So sometimes things are real good yielders, and sometimes they drop a little bit more. The Golden Hawk variety was actually one of the most consistent varieties in the state. The two worst trials that it was in across all of the trials that we had at all university trials was one was a 92% and one was a 94%. So everything else was 98 or better, and that alluded to all the trials in it, 88% of the time. 88% of the time, it was about 98% or better. So very, very consistent variety. One unique thing about this, and so, you know, we have quite a lot of acres that we cover of 15 different varieties or so. And when I walk this variety, you will notice that it's not going to throw a giant head. It's going to throw the same size head every time. And I kind of believe that that helps it a little bit more in some of those drier areas or some of those tougher areas. I mean, it's going to give you this every time. It's not going to try to stretch out, overdo itself, and then hurt itself back. That's kind of my theory. I don't know. But I couldn't be more happy with how it did last year, and very excited to see how it does this year. We have great production out on it this year, and we had good production last year for the first year out, and we pretty much sold out of what we had on it. So variety to really take a close look at and consider. Above average on corn stalks. You can plant it in bean ground. You can go after wheat wherever you want.
Very good, thanks, Pat. Folks, any questions? Any varieties that maybe we didn't cover?
I got two questions for you. One is, I know a lot of folks will do blends. And so, in your opinion, as a matter of risk management, whenever it comes to productivity, what varieties would you think would be good options to consider in multiple variety blends?
Yeah, that's a good question, Luke. And whenever we think of blends, right, I think that they do have a little bit better stability maybe than a single variety, right? Because you have some protection there. Going back in the varieties that we talked, right? If we had 2 years ago AG Golden and AP Bigfoot in the same field, you wouldn't have such a hard hit from the winter kill on that field as compared to AG Golden alone, right? So it does bring some more stability like that. Now, which varieties would I blend? It really depends on the cropping system, right? So if we're going after corn, I'll pick 3 varieties with good scab tolerance, right? Because we don't want to open up that window. And today we have enough varieties with good scab tolerance to do that, right? So a few varieties here that probably could be on that blend in this region. Maybe KS Providence with a pretty decent scab tolerance there and really good yield potential and performance. Probably you could have RockStar there as well. That's a pretty. You got that blended together?
Well, this was new to us this year. We took a little bit of it to some of the RockStar that was new the year before, but those two together for one blend.
Oh, that's good to know. So I'm not too far off here. I was looking for it.
Either that or you're really wrong.
At least we're consistent wrong. Yeah. But that would be an option there. Let me think here. Probably a 3-way blend is kind of what we recommend, right? To really spread out your risk. You don't want too many more varieties than that.
So are you talking focusing on, say you're going after corn, you're saying get 3 varieties that are good for scab, or are you saying pick 3 varieties that are going to have different strengths? Like this one has exceptional drought tolerance, this one has exceptional scab resistance, and this one's good on acid soils or something like that, so that even if you have, because basically we can't predict what the season's going to look like ahead of time. So I'm just kind of wondering, is it kind of like helping cover all your bases if you have varieties with different strengths mixed in there?
Well, there's certain risks I'll jump in and then I'll let you go. There's certain risks right? If you're planting after beans, you need something that tillers, right? So you can pick 3 varieties, go after beans. But you don't know if it's going to be a stripe breast eater or not, right? So in that case, you can split your risk a little bit, planting a susceptible variety versus not. So I'll let Romulo jump in, but that's the kind of thought there. If you know you're going to have scab risk, you can pick 3 varieties that have scab. It's kind of which risks you know and which you don't, and what you want to balance.
Yeah, your line of thought is right? But I agree with Kelsey here that if you have something that is a big risk, you don't want to open that door, right? So if you're going to acid soils, I'm not going to put Wolverine there, right? So I'll start with that. So what's your biggest limitation there? Is acid soils? Okay, so we exclude a bunch of varieties already, and then you mix based on bringing some diversity to that, whether it is stripe rust or you don't want to be too far off in maturity, but you can play a little bit with maturity as well for protection of freeze damage, right? Or heat stress. As long as you're within a window, right? You don't want to put an early with a late, but from a medium early to a medium or medium another. You had two, right?
Yeah, the other one I wanted to ask is have any of the results that you've seen in any of your studies indicated any sort of relationship between performance, particularly whenever it comes to yield, with the size of area of adaptation? One of the things I've been wondering is, whenever we talk about these varieties that have wide areas of adaptation, is that actually a limitation on yield because we're trying to get it to work in so many different environments versus if we have a narrow area of adaptation where it can really shine? Is there any credence to that line of thinking?
Well, I think there's a lot of credits there that I don't think that we have explored that, but that's a good question, right? It's a matter of, okay, is it simply a stable variety everywhere, or is it a variety that really shines under given conditions, right? And I think that's a really good question. I have not looked directly into that, but if we think of a few examples of AP Bigfoot put out as a huge area of adaptation, but then it doesn't shine, right, everywhere there. We don't really see it kind of showing towards the top very consistently, right? So there, I think you're onto something there. I don't know that we have looked at it in that way. But, if I would put some thought here, again, coming back to the fact that we have 50 varieties that could work well in this region, right? More and more, I think we can be more tailored to that cropping season and pick something that shines in the region and in that cropping season.
The reason I ask that is because a lot of times whenever you would assume that the line of thinking whenever it comes to variety developers, breeders, and dealerships, they're thinking we want a wide area so that we can cover our customer base or develop a large market. Whereas a farmer in Smith County farms only in Smith County. So he wants something that excels in Smith County. He does not care if it excels in Morton County. So I'm just kind of wondering if, it could be something where it's like, Bigfoot could be 90 to 95% in all 105 counties. But if there's a variety that's 115% in Smith County, that's the variety that the Smith County farmer wants.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think that we have looked at it that way. And I just want to bring up one thing really quick. Like whenever we're talking about the percentage of the trial, remember that 100% is average. Right? So when we say 95% is actually below
average, yeah.
Right? So we're looking for something that may be 105, 106, 108 or more, right? That's just one quick comment. Kelsey, you have any thoughts on that? It's a good question.
That's a great question. I will say, the performance tests, you could summarize the whole state, right? The nice thing is you can also summarize them regionally. So we have, 3 performance tests in the north central region every year. Is that right? Is it 3? Maybe 2? But you can look back.
Is it at Belleville, Beloit, and Ellsworth?
So yeah,
Those 3?
3 in this region. So, before coming here, we reviewed the kind of north central yield performance data. So that might get, of course, that's not on your farm. I'm sure it'd be nice to have a little performance test on everybody's farm. We can't do that, right? But you can look at, Belleville, we know that was after soybeans, right? We can look at these like regional performance tests, right, to help at least narrow in on what's been consistent. And if you look at that over the 3-year average, right, you can start to see some varieties that kind of shake out regionally. But yeah, that's a great point, right? Maybe the statewide average. We have such a incredibly variable state here. Makes it a good state to do research in because we have every basically place you could grow wheat with different moisture patterns, right? But of course, yeah, there's going to be varieties that shine regionally.
One of the things that I really like, this type of interaction here is that our research is only going to be relevant if it matters for you guys, right? Both Kelsey and I have a large research program, many students working, that are with plots in 10, 12 locations all over the state. And some every now and then we're going to get some questions from you guys that we're not thinking about, and maybe we don't have the answers, right? And then we can actually